Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of CAIR on Air, the Muslim Action Hour. I'm your host, Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the Deputy Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations. I'm here today with my co-host, Ayan Ajeen, the Communications Coordinator of CAIR. Assalamu alaikum, Ayan. How are you?
Assalamu alaikum, Edward. Alhamdulillah. How about you?
I'm good, alhamdulillah, good. And a big welcome to our listeners on American Muslim 360, as well as anyone watching this program online. Today, inshallah, we're going to be discussing the situation in France that is now bubbling up and spreading around the world. And to discuss the situation, we've got on a special guest, who many of you will be meeting for the very first time, Brother Hudhaifa Shabazz, who is the new Research and Advocacy Coordinator for CAIR National. He is in charge of the Department of Research and Advocacy, formerly known as the Department for Monitoring Islamophobia. I'm going to ask Hudhaifa very briefly to introduce himself and tell you about the work that he's done in the past and the great work that he's going to be doing for CAIR. Many of you know that Dr. Abbas Barzagar was our former director. He did a great job, and now he's going back into academia. And alhamdulillah, he trained Brother Hudhaifa before leaving. And so alhamdulillah, we've got the best of both worlds, and he's been doing a great job so far. So, Brother Hudhaifa, assalamu alaikum. Please introduce yourself to the community.
Wa alaikum salam. Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for having me, Ayan and Edward. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be part of the CAIR family. I am the new Research and Advocacy Coordinator, as Brother Edward mentioned, but previously I was a summer fellow with the Institute for Policy Studies, where I was doing a lot of work around military spending and analyzing and monitoring bills around military spending. And prior to that, I was part of the Othering and Belonging Institute, working on issues of ethno-nationalism across the globe and working on the far right, which is very relevant to the discussion we're about to have today. So I'm very excited to be part of the CAIR family. The work I'm doing right now is focusing on the Civil Rights Report, focusing on what we are going to talk about in the future in terms of the Islamophobia report. So I'm excited about what the future holds, and I look forward to working with the CAIR family, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah, we're very happy to have you. So, as you know, we've been privately discussing today for the issue of international anti-Muslim bigotry, Islamophobia overseas, and its connections to Islamophobia here in our country. And so I think we're seeing a perfect example of this issue in France. To summarize what is going on there could be difficult, given that this is not new. It's been going on for, someone would say 20 years, but you could even argue decades, dating back to when the French government invaded Algeria and massacred literally millions of Algerian Muslims, decapitated them. Some took their heads, took pictures of them, made postcards of it before eventually being defeated by Algerian revolutionaries and kicked out of Algeria. And then, of course, more recently, the issue that we're seeing is France's version of secularism being used to suppress freedom of religion. Famously, the French government passed a law about 20 years ago banning Muslim students or students of any faith from wearing visible signs of their religion, from hijabs, crosses, kippas, and also the same for public servants. And then there have been Muslim women arrested for wearing full-body swimsuits in France and certain French cities. And you've even got, ironically, a ban on wearing the face veil in public. That's a crime in France. And yet at the same time in France, it is a crime not to wear a medical face veil in certain circumstances.
Right.
And that's kind of the history. But now we've got another issue and a series of issues that have bubbled up in France over the past month. Can you just give us a summary, Brother Hudhaifa, of what in the world is going on right now?
Well, as you mentioned, 200 years of colonial brutality, the manifestations are still happening today. And so what we're seeing in France today is a collective punishment of 5 million French Muslims for the actions of a single individual. And so what has happened in the past week or so is the horrific killing of Samuel Paty, who showed pictures of the Prophet Muhammad in his school, knowing that this is a sensitive and religious topic to many Muslims across the globe, and so. Oh, after that, we saw calls. We saw the murder of Samuel Paty by an individual who supposedly, was using our religion in that name. But however, what we were seeing previously, is that Macron, days before, was saying that he wanted to liberate Islam, and that Islam was in crisis. And then immediately after the attack, we saw that Macron was using this opportunity to weaponize Islamophobia, to pander to the far right. And immediately after that, we also saw the killings of two stabbings of Muslim women near the Eiffel Tower. So it's a very nasty situation. Macron should be taking initiatives to unite the Muslim community. Rather, he's pandering to the far right and dividing the communities. And so it's a very disturbing situation on the ground there right now.
Absolutely. And I mean, the thing that we have to point out is that, when the murder of this educator occurred, the French Muslim community vocally spoke up against it and condemned it, right? And in response, the French government has raided mosques, raided Islamic organizations, threatened to shut down Islamic organizations, none of which had anything to do with this murder, right? The person of the murder was shot and killed on the scene, and they've arrested a few other people, I think for incitement or some other connections. But the French government is using this incident, this murder, as an excuse to expand their pre-existing campaign of anti-Muslim bigotry, Islamophobia, to target mainstream French Muslims, including France's largest anti-Islamophobia organization. Again, despite the fact that all these groups are patently opposed to all forms of extremism, including extremism that would lead to this sort of horrific murder. Now, in response to, so we've had this series of events, right? So we have the historical issues with France, Algeria. We've got the more recent issues with this hostility to religion, in particular Islam, over the past 20 years. Then we have the threat of the far right almost winning a presidential election in France. Marine Le Pen's party has gotten awful close. And some people think that as a result of these incidents, they're getting much closer to taking power in France. So you've had that background. Then you have the cartoon issue. Then you have the terrorist attacks that have occurred. And now you have Emmanuel Macron essentially waging a general attack on the Muslim community in France. Now, in response to that, so that's where we are. And now we've got a boycott campaign that's been launched. Can you tell us about that?
Right, absolutely. And just back on the issue of the raiding of mosques. So as a response, we are seeing the raiding of mosques and a crackdown of Muslim organizations, and in particular, the Collective Against Islamophobia, which is one of the largest human rights organizations on the ground in France. But interestingly, what we saw as a response from the French government, what the Interior Minister of France said about the Collective Islamophobia, he said that they were the enemy within. And so this is a really important thing to mention, is because we are in a time of election for France. And again, Macron is pandering to the far right. And when we hear statements like this, as a result, we see the stabbings of what happened to the two Muslim women near France. And so it's an immediate response, an immediate consequence of the actions and the speech of the French government. And so now many people are taking it, many French Muslims saying, hey, let's start an initiative to boycott French products, and urging Arab nations to assist in this boycott, whether it's specific organizations, specific grocery companies, and asking them to assist with this boycott.
Right. And the boycott is, it's really about two issues. Ian, let me have you jump in here and take it away, and let's address this issue, inshallah. I know you've got something to show us.
Yeah, so because we're talking about the raid, I have a video I want to show, and then after that we can get into the boycott discussion.
So we're going to be playing a video right now coming up, inshallah. This and as you see, the people are essentially holding up the French flag, you know, to kind of symbolize, you know, they are French, they're French Muslims, right? And what is being done to them is insane, right? This is, you know, the most extreme understanding of secularism you could have. That, you know, it's one thing to say you're not going to have religion in government. It's another thing to say you're going to have government attacking religion. And then you've also got, I keep pressing for you again. And then you've also got Muslim women who are present on the other side of the wall, and the police are standing guards, you know, overwatch over them as well. Yes, back there, you got the police moving in on them as well. And so this is a country, again, that is portraying itself as this beacon of liberty and freedom. But what we have to understand is that when they say freedom of religion, or they really mean something wholly different than what we mean in America, where you don't have religion in government, but the government also doesn't interfere with religion. Here, the French government, President Macron has said very vocally he wants to interfere with how Islam is practiced in France, with who can be an imam, with where house of worship can get their funding, with what can be taught, with what Muslim students can do in French schools. And then, of course, now we're seeing this escalation to the point of literally physically walking into mosques, wearing shoes, which is incredibly insulting to Muslims to wear unclean shoes inside of a mosque, and detaining Muslims and clearing out a house of worship. All right, we can pause the video. So take it from here, inshallah.
So we're talking about these situations, and obviously they're happening in France and they're happening overseas. But Edward, can you tell us a little bit about what CAIR's stance has been on this and what we have said about the issue?
Right. So, you know, look, our position is, you know, CAIR is an American Muslim civil rights organization. So even though our primary focus is always going to be the issues happening right here in our neighborhood, Islamophobia here at home, police brutality, systemic racism, you know, immigration, abuses at the border. However, we care about justice, period. And if there's something we can do about a cause of justice implicating, especially our community overseas, we're going to speak up, whether that's in Myanmar, Xinjiang in China, or in France. And so CAIR has vocally condemned the French government's overreaction, attacking and targeting the broader Muslim community. We've called for the U.S. Commission on Religious Freedom to investigate France and label them a country of concern in regard to this incident. And we have also spoken up in defense of the right of people to boycott France if they choose to do so. Hudayfa, can you talk about the boycott issue?
Right. So what we're seeing is an initiative by French Muslims and even here in the United States to call on the boycott of French products, and also asking Arab nations such as Kuwait to assist in the boycott of French products. And so if you see in specific grocery stores, for example, there won't be specific French products, or people won't buy them because they are from France. And so there's this initiative happening to boycott French products because of the collective punishment they are imposing on 5 million Muslims for the action of one individual.
Yeah. And in addition as well, of course, because of the president, you know, it's one thing for President Macron to say, you know, we have free speech, we can't interfere with what people do privately with cartoons, but he took a step further and on behalf of the French government kind of defended the substance of the cartoons and said, we're going to keep doing it. And so that has sparked a backlash in the Muslim world. But the irony, of course, is that the French government, as you just noted, is calling for authoritarian governments in the Middle East and in other parts of the Muslim world to suppress to stop their citizens from boycotting French products. So the irony is the France says, well, we believe in freedom of speech and all this stuff, but you're asking dictatorships to ban their own citizens from peacefully boycotting. So the irony about,
Mhm.
and then I think something else happened in Mauritania. Ion, do you want to, or what did you want to tell us about that? I believe, or some country, I believe, in Africa, if it wasn't Mauritania.
Um,
The incident was, apparently, this just came out today, that in a country outside of France, Muslim country, a cartoon was drawn mocking President Macron. And in response, the French government has cut ties, business
Right.
ties, because of offense over this cartoon. So again, it's this double standard of you can give it out, but you can't take it.
Right. And also, the French government, like you said earlier, it's priding itself on the tenets of secularism, what they call laïcité. But at the same time, they're attempting to intervene when other people are using their right to free speech to engage in a boycott issue. So there's that irony of free speech issues and boycott, but at the same time, France is not giving that same right to other individuals, but rather what the French government is doing right now is that they're exploiting terrorist outrages to employ Islamophobia among 5 million Muslims.
Yeah. Ion, tell us what you're showing us right now, please.
So we just spoke about the boycott and the list of, this is a list of the companies that the boycott includes. But Josepha just mentioned that there are, like, the countries are telling their citizens not to boycott. They're encouraging them to stay away from this, but this is the list that includes.
Yeah. So the French government is trying to convince, again, authoritarian governments not to allow this sort of boycott. And CAIR's position, Ian, to answer your question, is people have the right to boycott. People have the right to freedom of religion, and the French government needs to deal with that, right? You are only fueling extremism on all sides when you attack freedom of religion in France or anywhere around the world. So go ahead.
Similar to a boycott, we also put out a statement today encouraging American Muslims not to travel to France because of and one thing we cited in that note was the incident that recently happened where the two women were attacked. So if you want to tell a little more about that in the statement that we put out.
Right. So, the concern is that because the French government is engaging in this collective punishment of the French Muslim community, targeting French Muslims at large, fanning the flames of bigotry, and you, again, as Hudayfa noted, you had 2 Muslim women of Algerian origin were attacked, stabbed outside the Eiffel Tower while being called dirty Arabs and saying, go back to your country or something. This incident happened. And in addition to that, again, the French government has laws that restrict the freedom of religion, your ability to practice your religion and wear religious clothing. So our advice to American Muslims is, if you are traveling for some reason, despite the pandemic, we advise you to not go to France right now. The government has lost the plot, as my younger friends would say. And until they stop this conduct, stop this behavior, we've all got to be very careful. At the same time, though, we got to speak up in defense of the French Muslims who are there. Who are trying to contribute to their community, to their country, and under attack. And so they have asked for solidarity, and I hope they all know that we stand with them against all forms of extremism and bigotry, and that we hope, inshallah, this will soon come to an end. So, Hudayfa, can you tell us, you've studied the far right, can you tell us a bit about Marine Le Pen's party? And because we're complaining about Emmanuel Macron, but there is also a danger here that in the next French election, you could have something even worse come to pass. I mean, when you hear the French government refer to Muslims as the enemy within, that harkens back to a time in Europe, we all know, when other religious minorities, particularly Jewish Europeans, were suffering extreme violence, culminating in the Holocaust. Can we talk about Marine Le Pen's party and what the danger is if they take power?
Right. I mean, the irony is that Marine Le Pen's party and the people who follow Marine Le Pen's party, they're applauding the actions of Emmanuel Macron. They're a big fan of what's happening right now. But Marine Le Pen's party has a history of employing Islamophobia, using anti-Muslim tropes, using Islamophobic rhetoric to garner support amongst their voter base. And this is not something that's new. If you look all across Europe, and if you look at far right parties in Europe, even for Sweden, for example, they're they're weaponizing Islamophobic rhetoric to garner their support for a voter base and to have a future of like a white nationalist state, a homogenous state. And so they're really, these issues are extreme. And so as much as people want to, come to the defense of Macron that he's a centrist, he's actually very far from that, and making every effort possible to not only garner his voter base, but to garner the votes of the far right and fueling the far right simultaneously.
Yeah. The ironic thing is that, I mean, it's not just a problem with the government, right? There is a problem in French society. And, part of it, I mean, let's be honest, France suffered a series of horrific terrorist attacks by extremist groups during the reign of ISIS. And so that undoubtedly contributed, to fears and hostility towards Muslims in France. But Islamophobia existed and was significant before those attacks happened, right? Well before, again, the hijab ban, all that happened well over a decade ago, right? And so, and furthermore, when these horrific attacks in France did happen, again, the French community spoke up against it, right? These attackers, in many cases, were irreligious people who went from one extreme of irreligiosity to the other extreme of suddenly, blowing stuff up and killing Muslims in the process, but they weren't representative of the mainstream French community. So it makes no logical sense to blame or hate all French Muslims or any French Muslims because of what some extremists do. Just like it doesn't make sense for the Muslim world at large to hate French people because of what the French did to Algerians, 50 years ago, or for that matter, what the French government is still doing in certain Muslim countries by propping up dictators who unleash horrific crimes against. But I digress. So it's almost 5 o'clock, so we got to wrap up now. Ayan, I'll turn the last question or comment to you, and then inshallah we'll close out.
So I'm curious, is there a larger coalition that's doing something about this? That I know that CAIR has put out statements, but is there a group of organizations, human rights and civil rights organizations, that are trying to make a change in the Islamophobia that's present in France right now?
Well, Hudayfa, you want to take that? I can add something, but if you want.
Well, I'll just a brief note on that. I mean, we have, I think the most attention a lot of people should be supporting is the collective against Islamophobia, because they've been explicitly named as a target by the French government and a crackdown by the French government for their work. But they're a human rights organization, very similar to the work of what CAIR is doing and fighting Islamophobia and hate on the ground. And so they need the support from the French community, not just the French Muslim community. And so, in addition to that, also supporting the vocal boycott of French products as well. Yeah.
And again, we CAIR, our position is, if you want to boycott, we defend your right to do so, like with any, whether it's products from China, Myanmar, France, people have the right to boycott. And the French government has no business trying to convince dictatorships to suppress people's right to boycott. And I think, we second what David just mentioned, that the anti-Islamophobia groups in France, which are under attack by the French government, we hope that the French community stands up. Look, we have seen this story before in Europe, right? Europe was not always this place that respected religious minorities and was diverse. We all know the history of European countries where it's not even that you had to be Christian. If you were the wrong brand of Christian, you could be burned at the stake, right? It wasn't until the 1800s, actually, in England, that they repealed a law that forbid people from questioning the Trinity, right? And so you've had this issue, and of course, it goes without saying the horrors that have been inflicted on Jewish people in Europe for centuries and centuries, culminating in the Holocaust. So we don't want to see this pattern repeated again. We've seen the far right rise in Hungary, in France. We've seen them making strides in other places, becoming prominent in other countries. And our message to our European friends is, you have got to put a button on this quickly before history repeats itself in a horrific way. May God forbid. So with that, it's 5 o'clock. We'll wrap up. Hudayfa, so much. Thank you so much for joining us. Ayan, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to note, someone in the comments pointed out the video that we showed, actually, that raid on that mosque happened before this incident occurred. So it was an older video, but it still shows you that how dangerous this issue is, that they were doing this to mosques even before the latest incident happened. But thank you to the person in the comments who noted that out, that it's an older video. So with that, thank you so much everyone for watching. Thank you for listening. And we all know the election is coming up next week. Inshallah, CAIR is going to have a lot of election programming for you, many events related to the election, trainings, other things coming up in these final days. Tomorrow, October 28th, Ayan, tell us about this.
Yeah, tomorrow we're doing a Know Your Rights at the polls. We're having a voter mobilization Nusayba Mubarak, she is a voter mobilization manager with Move On, and Kifa Shah, she's a campaign manager with Empower Change. And they're going to come and talk to us about what to expect at the polls on election day, and to make sure people know their rights and they know common issues that may arise. So tune in tomorrow at 7 p.m. It's going to be live on our Facebook page.
Inshallah. Yes, please tune in, inshallah. And then we'll also be having a few other events we'll be advertising for you soon, inshallah. Until then, thank you to our listeners on American Muslim 360. Thank you everyone watching online. Inshallah, we will see you Thursday afternoon for the next episode of CAIR on Air, the Muslim Action Hour. Until then, inshallah. Until then, assalamu